Next on KQED Newsroom, the politics of water conservation.
It's a political headache.
Plus, building seismically safer homes in the world's poorest countries. And meet the American children left behind in China. Why they spend years separated from their parents. Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Let's talk about the drought. You're probably already conserving water, but soon you may have to reduce your water use even more. Next week, the State Water Resources Control Board will vote on a plan requiring water districts to cut usage by as much as 36%. What will that look like? Scott Shafer spoke with Paul Rodgers, managing editor for KQED Science and San Jose Mercury News environment writer.
Paul Rodgers, let's talk water.
Happy to do it.
Well, 4 years into this drought, we finally got some teeth on state regulations over water use. Give us a sense of what this is going to mean for some of these cities like Beverly Hills and Hillsborough that have to have a 36% reduction in their water use.
Yeah, you know, what the governor has done here is, in a lot of ways, pretty fair. He's essentially said that we're going to look at all the cities in California, all the water districts, and see, based on per capita use, who has already done a pretty good job conserving water, and those places will only have to save as little as 8%, and that includes places like San Francisco, Hayward, East Palo Alto, Santa Cruz, and then the places at the other end of the scale that have not done a very good job conserving water and have higher per capita use, Hillsborough, Atherton, Beverly Hills, Bakersfield, Modesto, they have to do a lot more, and they're going to have a lot of pain in their communities where the low users, people are barely going to feel this.
And when you say they, do you mean the individuals and the businesses or the water districts or both? How's that going to work?
I mean both, because under Brown's rules, which will take effect on June 1st after the State Water Board votes on them May 5th, under those rules, any city or water district that doesn't meet their target that's given to them by the state, it faces a $10,000 a day fine. That's a lot of money. And Brown is not telling each place how you meet your goal. He's simply saying you have to do it. So some places will put water cops out there. They'll limit watering golf courses. Other places will say maybe you can water your lawn once a week. It all depends on where you live.
But these water districts have already had authority to issue $500 fines. How many of those have been issued? Do we have any idea?
Very, very few. And the reasons are multiple. Number one, when cities and water agencies sell less water, they make less money, but their fixed costs remain the same. They still have to pay the electricity bill and employees' salaries, so they have a disincentive to actually conserve. Second, it's a political headache. People get mad at them, and a lot of these are elected agencies. They want to do everything they can except conserve, but now they're being forced to by the state because the drought is the worst in our 164-year state history.
And did they pass, or they may pass along these fines to individuals, right? But
no, I think what's going to happen is we're not going to know until later in the summer whether the governor's State Water Board is fining cities $10,000 a day. But what is going to happen is the cities are going to put penalties in place. Some of them are going to raise the cost of water at the higher end. You know, penalties and things if you use more than a set amount.
So we had a court ruling, an appeals court ruling a couple weeks ago, striking down these tiered water pricing schemes. What does that mean for this plan, if anything?
It took away one of the really good tools that cities have to meet their targets. Essentially, the studies have shown for many years, if you charge people more for something, they use less of it. So with water, some places like Santa Cruz, they charge you about $3 per unit of water, up to 10 units. Above that, it's $50 a unit. And they had huge water conservation last summer because of that. Now, what the court has said is you can only charge higher rates if you can show that that's what it costs the government to provide that water. You can't charge punitively higher rates. So now some of these cities, especially around Sacramento and in the Inland Empire where it's hot and people use a lot of water in the summer to water their lawns, they have gone to Brown and said, give us a break. This is too hard. And what he did essentially was say, no.
Too bad.
You have to figure this out.
Yeah. Now, of course, this does not include agriculture, farms. And the governor says, well, they've already taken a big hit in terms of their water allocation. But who's monitoring that and groundwater as well. I mean, is that included in their allocation cutbacks?
Farmers use 80% of the developed water in California. That's the water that people use. Now, they only contribute 2% of the total state GDP, but they have already taken a big hit. And there's two important things here. Number one, they have been cut back, in some cases zero, the amount of water they get from the Delta, from state and federal agencies. So they're overpumping their own groundwater. There are rules, but those don't kick in for years. So basically, they're slitting their own throats if they're using all their own groundwater up. But they have no alternative. Bankruptcy is the alternative. So we can't take water quite often that they would save and move it to cities. If an almond grower in Modesto pumps less water from his well, you can't move that to San Francisco or Los Angeles.
It seems like almonds have become the pariah crop in California. Is that fair to say that they suck a lot of water and therefore we should, and plus it's a hard demand for water because they're trees. You can't just leave it fallow.
That's right. That's really the issue. Very few people in the state would say you'd be able to get a bill through the legislature that tells farmers what crops they can grow any more than what kind of computers Silicon Valley can make.
And the governor seems to have no interest in that anyway.
No, and you know, but it does make a lot of money for these places. A lot of them have high unemployment rates. They're trying to send their kids to college just like everywhere else. And it's not like Google or Apple is going to move to the Tulare or Visalia area. I mean, that's all they have. And so, you know, they after a long recession have finally found a way to make some money with almonds. But you're right, what they're doing is hardening demand. When you have row crops, if you have a drought, you can let it go, but you can't let trees go. So that's the political problem.
So a lot of folks in California and businesses have been cutting back. We have been conserving water. So who are the big water wasters right now?
Anybody with a lawn at this point. You know, a lot of people in urban areas have not really felt the pain of the drought yet. We've watched farmers feel it. We've watched fields go fallow. We've watched orchards die. But we've still been watering our lawns. And lawns use 50% of the water in residential areas in California. There's no reason to complain that this is too hard. All you have to do is water your lawn half as much, and you'll save 25% of your overall use.
Well, and there's also, it would seem, a lot of room to use more recycled water, or water from your shower, for example.
Absolutely.
Some people put a bucket in the shower. You can water plants with that.
I have a family of 4. I've cut water use 40% at my house without making any changes on indoor use. I simply put buckets in the shower, cut my lawn watering to 1 day a week, and use the buckets with my kids on the weekend to water all the other plants. And I'm down to 9 units a month. And we still have an okay lawn, and everything's okay.
Paul Rodgers.
You can do it.
Paul Rodgers, model citizen, managing editor of KQED's Science Unit and environment writer at the San Jose Mercury News. As always, thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
And now to Nepal, where hundreds of thousands of people remain homeless after last week's devastating earthquake. The magnitude 7.8 quake has killed more than 6,200 people. Many died when buildings collapsed. Joining me now is Janise Rodgers, Chief Operating Officer of GeoHazards International, a nonprofit working to reduce risks posed by natural disasters. Janise, welcome.
Thank you, Thuy.
What are the biggest challenges to building earthquake-resistant structures in developing countries like Nepal?
Well, there are a couple of things you need. First, you need a standard so that people know what to do. They know how to build. And people have to have resources to build correctly. And the government has to enforce the building code. That's perhaps the most important thing.
Well, what are the codes like in Nepal, and how do they compare here to the Bay Area?
Well, codes in Nepal are modern earthquake-resistant design codes developed in the mid-1990s. And codes around the world are similar in a lot of ways. And Nepal has a very good building code. The difficulty, of course, is that it hasn't been followed in all the new construction since it was adopted. And of course, there's all the construction that predates the code that wasn't built to that code.
So why haven't the codes been followed? Is it an enforcement problem? Nepal has also been besieged by political turmoil.
Yes, I think enforcement is a big concern anywhere, and especially in Nepal, the authorities are just in a position where the demands are so heavy on them. There are many, many buildings being built every day, every month. They don't have adequate staff or resources to go around and inspect all those buildings. So it's really an impossible task for them. But I will say that there are some efforts that have been underway for the past couple of years to change that.
Are those efforts good enough in light of this tragedy? Can Nepal build safer housing to quickly help the tens of thousands of people who are now homeless?
Yes, they can. One of our partner organizations, the National Society for Earthquake Technology in Nepal, has been doing a building code compliance program for the past, I believe, more than a year. And so they've been starting to see some good results. I was just there in December, and they were telling me about that they were pleased with the way that the program was developing. So we're hopeful that with that good start, that similar efforts can be made building new buildings after this earthquake.
And in developing countries, you have the economic factor. And is it economically feasible for a lot of these families, for example, to rebuild and have seismically safe homes? What's the cost differential?
Well, people may need some help, but it doesn't necessarily cost that much more to build an earthquake-resistant building when you're already building a building anyway. In some cases, it can be as little as 5% more.
Is that all?
In other cases, it can be more than that, but it's not a huge amount necessarily, because you still have to buy the reinforcing steel, you still have to buy the concrete. It's just you need to buy a little bit more, and you have to, reinforcing steel, you have to put it in the right place. And so those are things that people can do.
When you look at this situation, the magnitude of the tragedy is just so immense. Are there examples from other countries that have gone through a similar experience, and did they emerge from it with safer buildings after a major quake?
Yes, I'd like to point out the example of the state of Gujarat in neighboring India. Gujarat had a massive earthquake in 2001, and many people died, many buildings collapsed. And after that, the state really made significant efforts to improve their buildings. People started following codes. They also developed an innovative idea to help people that maybe they couldn't afford to hire a structural engineer to help them with their building. They developed standard plan sets that are available with the authorities, and so someone can come and pick up those standard plans that are designed by an engineer, and they can have an earthquake-resistant building. And there are a lot of other programs that are happening in India as a result of that earthquake. There were a lot of changes made. Now,
and just in the 30 seconds or so we have remaining, then what are the lessons we should learn from the Nepal earthquake?
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense to invest ahead of time in preparedness in safer buildings. A lot of attention gets focused on relief after the fact, when if you make the investments beforehand, you can save a lot of lives.
Point well taken. Janise Rodgers, the GeoHazards International, thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to switch gears now and talk about immigration. Some American-born children of Chinese immigrants are spending part of their childhood in China, away from their parents. Leo Zhao, a student at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism, visited one kindergarten in China's Fujian province, where many of the students are American.
This is Kimber, a private kindergarten in the small town of Guantou in southern China's Fujian province. Like many schools in China, the day here begins with morning exercise. What is different about Kimber is that most of these children are Americans by birth. In China, they're known as Young Liu Shou Ertong, or left behind foreign children. Hui Zhenjiang is the principal at Kimber.
广头的移居美国的比较多，我们这边的大多数的家长都是开餐馆的，开餐馆是非常忙的，没时间看管孩子，然后从美国带回来，放在爷爷奶奶身边带大的。
The children are only a few months old when they arrive. It will be years before they meet their parents again. For decades, people have been leaving Fujian province to find work overseas. From this small town of Guantou, some 60,000 have emigrated since the 1980s. Zhu Xunling is with the Guantou Overseas Chinese Association.
我们这里这个 为主，靠这个沿海嘛，靠沿海的，这个田地比较少，所以说我们劳动力比较多。80年代初期的时候，很多就漂流过海，啊，这个旅游方式啊，这什么方式啊，就好多就到美国去了。
For most people, it was a one-way trip. While toiling in Chinatowns across the United States, they would send money home to help their parents build houses. Struggling to survive in the U.S., they also began to send their young children back to China. This boy, named Zhao Weijie, was sent back to China when he was a year old.
Bye-bye.
His grandparents have raised 3 other children for their sons and daughters working overseas.
这没办法的，为了生活怎么办法？如果没有抱回来，就不能赚钱了。
Weijie's mother sent him toys, clothes, and gifts from the U.S., but the only contact he's had with her has been through a computer screen.
来了，不动，来了。
你知道妈妈在哪儿吗？
妈妈睡觉了，那再见。再见。
再见。
At this kindergarten alone, more than 2/3 of its 250 students were born outside of China. Guangzhou is not unique. Across Fujian province, as many as 20,000 boys and girls are left behind to foreign children.
那这一节课呢，我希望小朋友们画的就是我们过年的时候，小朋友们住在房子里，爸爸妈妈、爷爷奶奶带着我们一家人热热闹闹的在一起玩耍。郭张景，我问你啊，这个是谁？这个是谁？
忘了。
这个呢？
爸，
爸爸是在哪里呀？
美国。
哦，你爸爸在美国，那你会不会想他呀？
会哭了。
你都哭了。
伤心。
很伤心。那你爸爸什么时候回来呀？你知道吗
100年。
100年才回来啊？那你有没有想跟爸爸说的话？有没有？你想跟爸爸说什么呀？
想跟爸爸说你快点回来。
哦，想跟爸爸说。
The principal at Kimber says turnover is constant.
有的亲戚会来，亲戚来要出去了，然后小朋友年龄快到了，然后就会委托亲戚帮忙带出去的，进进出出的，经常这样子的。
谭景路拿一个树叶味的冰淇淋。
By the age of 5 or 6, most children return to the U.S. to attend elementary school. In less than a month, 6-year-old Liang Lexing will take that journey.
我叫梁乐欣，6岁，我从我妈妈肚子里面生出来的。我放假9天的时候就去美国了。
为什么要去美国？
因为我想爸爸妈妈。
你多久没有见你爸爸妈妈了？
很久。别人都有爸爸妈妈，我只有爷爷奶奶。
After 5 years apart, Lexing will soon be reunited with her parents.
对他们来说也是就是挺同情的。小孩子也说白了，父母亲居然是爷爷奶奶，很疼爱小孩子，老是呵护他，那绝对是代替不了母爱的。因为父母亲也为了赚钱，也为他们以后的生活更好、更幸福。
Well, joining me now are Reverend Norman Fong, Executive Director of the Chinatown Community Development Center, and Annette Wong, Immigrant Rights Program Manager at the nonprofit Chinese for Affirmative Action. Welcome to you both. Annette, I want to begin with you. You've worked with some of the parents of these children. Tell me more about their situation.
Yeah, sure. When I was living out in the East Coast in Philadelphia, I had the chance to work with a couple of parents who had sent their kids to back to Fujian to be raised by grandparents, and their situation was really, it was a really hard situation. They were young immigrants themselves, And once they had children, the place where they were working, they did restaurant work, but it was like a takeout stand. And so it really wasn't a place where you could raise children. And they didn't earn enough of a living to be able to afford childcare. And so without extended family in the picture in the United States, really sending them back to be raised by their grandparents was their only option. I think for a lot of newer immigrants, it's really hard to earn a living wage and a stable job, to find stable housing that's affordable. There's a lot of barriers and life can be very unstable. And so it's hard to raise children in those environments.
And it was really a heartbreaking piece to watch, actually, because these kids are brought back to China at such a young age after having been born in the U.S. And then once they're school age and they can enter the public school system here in the U.S., they're brought back. By then they're 5, perhaps 6 years old. They've gone that long without seeing their parents. So what is the re-entry process like, and what are the challenges that they face when they get here?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges that these children will face. You know, right off the bat, coming to a country that they don't know, the customs and the culture are different. There are language barriers. For most of them, they haven't learned English. They also are starting to live with their parents, who are their parents, but at the same time, in some ways, strangers that they've only interacted with, you know, through a computer screen. So there's a lot of challenges.
And Reverend Fong, you've worked in Chinatown for many years. Asian immigrants are continuing to arrive in San Francisco's Chinatown. Where are they finding housing, and what are they doing for work?
So a lot of the new immigrants live in what people call SRO, residential hotels. So they're small single rooms, 8 by 10. And if you can imagine, since single means one person, and you have 5 people living in there with bunk beds, it's pretty rough. So tough to get jobs. When I was younger, at least there were sewing factories. And I remember being put in a box as a little kid. But at least, you know, all the relatives are around, and that industry is gone. So you got restaurants, you got wherever caregiving sometimes, but it's hard. It's hard to figure out a plan to pay for childcare, which is a difficult thing. It's tough to find housing in the hottest market in the United States, San Francisco.
And speaking of the hot market, we are in the midst of a tech boom, San Francisco especially. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that are presenting themselves to the people that you work with every day?
The tech jobs are not going to the families that we work with.
What kinds of jobs are they taking, primarily in the restaurant industry?
Yeah, restaurant industries. There's not a whole lot of choices now. So actually, caregiving is going up, taking care of, and whatever. I mean, one of the best jobs, if you can do a hotel, get into a hotel job, that's really good. So some people are lucky for that. But
I would agree with Norman that at the same time, it's around jobs. It's mostly restaurant work, janitorial work, cleaning office buildings. And
construction. That's
construction.
Right. Construction.
Yeah. And hotel work, if folks are lucky, you know, a lot of hotel work may be unionized, and so people will have higher pay and better benefits to be able to care for, raise a family and care for children. But you know, folks are pretty lucky if they're able to get into those jobs.
And Reverend Fong, your organization recently did a study on poverty in San Francisco. Just last year, the results came out. What did you find?
So it's going to shock some people in San Francisco, but it won't shock us in Chinatown. So the largest ethnic group with the highest amount of poverty is actually the Chinese American community.
The Chinese American community?
Yes, and the Asian community. It's, what is it, 38,450 live under the federal guidelines of poverty. And that's a shock to some, but there was an increase between 2007 and 2013. We had the highest rate of unemployment and poverty during this period. It was rough. We're coming out of a rough period.
And what are the driving factors for that? Did you study it? Did you take a look at that?
No, we just checked the numbers, and it shocked a lot of people because people kind of stereotype different ethnic groups as doing fine. For our case, that's part of the problem. We put the study together to let national foundations know too, because we get less than 1% of foundation support around the country. And that's because if you add all the figures together, all the Asians, there's a lot doing really well, high educated, and then in Chinatown, you know it's bad. And in actually 12 cities around the country, the Asian population is very poor and they're suffering very quietly, like even sending kids away.
And so, Annette, are you seeing this happening primarily in urban centers? Perhaps maybe the stereotypes that Reverend Fong alluded to happen because the data is aggregated to everybody, but in the urban centers, it's very much a different face of poverty.
Yeah, I would agree with Reverend Fong. And a lot of times for when we see studies done, you know, they look at household income. And when we compare household income, you know, for a family that's just a nuclear family, you know, the income might be so high. And we look at the Asian household income and it looks like it's much higher, but that's because there's, you know, 4 or 5 income earners living there along with children. So the household size is just much larger. And if you sparse it out per income earner, it really is not as high as what we're seeing with native-born population.
I was going to mention that a lot of people come to Chinatown. It's one of the best tourist attractions. But inside, look, almost half of our community live in these single rooms. They're called SRO residential hotels. And it is affordable housing. People don't have a choice. You send your kids away. You live in a closet-like room. Actually, it's the history of our community. As we celebrate Asian Pacific Heritage Month, like my dad had to go through Angel Island. People had to leave their kids and family behind to come work on the railroad with the Irish too. And then it's just been a tough life for a lot of our families. But it's the other side of it is that we love our kids so much, we're willing
to do whatever it takes.
To do whatever it takes, yeah.
And Annette, let's wrap this up in the 30 seconds or so that we have, getting back to the segment that we saw then. What role do grandparents, aunts, uncles play in immigrant families here in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, that's a great question, Thuy, because even in my own family, I was raised with my grandmother, and she, you know, supported us with doing some of the childcare, but she also worked. And so, but I think that with families that are able to have extended family to help, with the household duties, including childcare, it can be life-changing.
So even for you, it was a reality. Thank you both for joining us today. Annette
Love your
Wong.
grandparents. They take care of all kind of kids.
And on that note, Reverend Norman Fong as well. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And that is it for our show. Thank you for joining us. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org. We leave you tonight with the newest exhibit at San Francisco Civic Center, the Fancy Animal Carnival. I'm Thuy Vu. Have a good night.